Our protagonist was a complete failure. In this world, several dungeons appeared with powerful monsters, and one day all the creatures came out of those dungeons and destroyed the entire world. Our hero had a strong sense of justice but was a total weakling. But then he met a demoness, and she wasn't just any demon, she was the most powerful of all. She found our boy interesting and decided to grant him an absurd power, all because she wanted to run a test. Thus the guy ended up gaining the strongest power of all, only to serve as a guinea pig for this demoness. With this new power, he could capture elemental girls and use their powers. Basically, the guy was going to build a harem of waifus. If you want us to keep bringing videos like this, leave a like and comment below. And without further delay, let's get to the video. Our story begins with a press conference celebrating that Sakurako managed to complete the Bail dungeon, which appeared 6 years ago in Russia. That dungeon was an S rank, and what she did was something unbelievable for humanity. Sakurako was an S rank player and was holding the 3rd position worldwide. Some reporters asked if by any chance she would try to complete Lulu Heart's dungeon. She gave a little laugh because this was humanity's last challenge, and while releasing her aura, she stated that she would indeed do it. And as she was leaving, the reporters kept asking thousands of questions, and watching through the screens was our protagonist saying that girl was just full of herself but that he had to hurry, because today was his part-time job carrying supplies for a dungeon, and he remembered her words saying she did everything alone. Nonsense. No one can conquer a dungeon alone, so he went outside and started gazing at the horizon. He narrowed his eyes in frustration, wishing he could challenge a dungeon too, and right in front of him was Lulu Heart's dungeon, the first one to appear in the world and the most difficult of all. Ever since players started appearing in the world, he got excited, but unfortunately our protagonist was called talentless. In other words, he didn't have permission to enter dungeons. He even started remembering some mission leaders who called him useless and kicked him out of their groups. Even one of his close friends asked if he wasn't going to give up on being a player. He had to stop dreaming, after all he was talentless. And that phrase echoed in the protagonist's head, and it's not like he was special for not having skills. Most people became talentless. Those who couldn't become players, 90% of those without skills who entered dungeons ended up dying and 10% disappeared. Because of that, groups began rejecting those without skills. Our hero knew that. He knew he didn't stand a chance, but even so he tried, and that's why he worked part-time carrying supplies for dungeon groups, and only called himself an idiot for keeping at it like an unreachable dream, and all he wished was to use that sword in his hands. But in the next moment an earthquake began and a great alert projected into the sky, indicating that a dungeon break was happening, and then a massive fire dragon appeared, followed by a devourer of futures as well. The 3rd great monster was the lamb that ended time, and these monsters had gigantic armies behind them. Several messages started warning that these monsters were simply ridiculous, and that people should run as fast as possible. The infinite lamb was chasing our protagonist in the middle of the street, and he tried using his sword to attack the monster, but the poor blade was split in half, and the monster's huge mouth was almost reaching him. And at that moment a player used the Scarlet Leaf Flash and sliced that monster in half. She asked if our hero was hurt. That was Sarah, an S rank 8th in the world ranking. The protagonist thanked her for saving his life, and the girl mentioned that several monsters like that one had started coming out of the portals. The protagonist asked if by any chance she needed help, but she replied that there was only one thing he could do, to run as fast as he could from the horde coming straight ahead. He, well, understood the message completely. She was right. Sarah shouted for him to run immediately. The protagonist knew that if he stayed there he would only get in the way, so he bolted, but he felt enormous frustration growing in his chest, so he ran. He ran for a long time and even hid behind a car. One of the infinite lambs was passing by his side. He was trying to escape through the alleys, even while being cornered, until he got startled because right in front of him he saw a woman collapsed on the ground, and she asked if this boy was a human, and the protagonist only said that she needed to go to the hospital as soon as possible. At that moment he remembered Sarah's words, that he should just run and forget everything about this place. But there was still one thing he could do: he could help people. But the moment he reached out his hand, that woman told him not to touch her. She hadn't fallen so low as to need the help of a mere human, but the protagonist didn't care about that, threw her onto his back and started running, while she kept telling him to leave her there. Not far away on the horizon, that dragon was channeling a magical breath, and it unleashed all that power in a single region, causing a massive fire destruction that swallowed blocks and wiped out buildings and houses around. That explosion also reached the protagonist, who from the impact was thrown into the middle of the street. He was dragged for several meters, tumbling non-stop. Then he faced the horizon, wondering what was happening. And there, right among the ruins, staring, was the dragon. His body completely froze upon seeing that figure, but that monster wasn't looking at him. It seemed to be searching for someone, but most importantly, he needed to save that woman. So he looked at her near the debris and once again put her on his back and started running. And the woman asked why. Why was he still resisting so much against these attacks? No matter which path he took from now on, he was going to die anyway. And the protagonist knew. He knew she was completely right about that. Her words were absolutely correct, but that wasn't a reason to do nothing. One needs to do something in a situation like this, even if it's hopeless. And the woman's eyes just glowed at those words. Then she asked if by any chance he would like to change his situation, and he answered yes. After all, he wanted to save this world, but he knew he didn't have any skills for that, and knew he wouldn't be able to save the whole world, but at least he wished to save that woman. Then she whispered if, by any chance, he would like to form an alliance with her. She raised her hand, saying she hated the human race for being so weak, and because of that was going to give our boy the opportunity to save the world one single time. And the protagonist asked how she could do something like that, and she laughed, of course. After all, it was simple. She would just send him to the past to start everything all over again. Then she asked the name of the human before her. In a loud voice, he declared his name was Kanzaki Yukari, but to make it easier, let's just call him Khan. Then a terrifying power emerged from that woman. Long horns were created, and she declared herself as Lulu Heart, the Demon Lord, Devourer of Souls, the supreme commander of Lulu Heart's dungeon. And then her tower began to shine intensely in the skies, and declared that her tower was a golden memory that must never be forgotten by the world, and now she entrusted the fate of this world into this boy's hands. Khan's body began to dematerialize. Then a great light took over everything before him, and a message warned that his life had been empty, and even so, he risked it to save an unknown woman in the world. In recognition of that, the round tables would assign him a skill, but at that instant an error occurred and everything turned red. That was because he didn't have enough skill to manifest abilities. The round table began to debate again. As a special exception, the round table would create a skill especially for Khan. That same skill began to condense and form before him, and the round table gave him the skill of the lost man. That skill made its bearer get lost and was of unknown ranking. The round table even blessed him for deciding to lose everything. Then his eyes opened once again, and he woke up extremely startled in his bed. On television, the news showed that the Baal dungeon had been born in Russia, meaning he had returned 6 years in time. He couldn't believe he had gone that far back into the past, until a little being started talking to him, saying he had finally woken up, and she gave a long smile. And who wouldn't be confused seeing that child with horns? It's explained that in the year 20, a strange tower appeared in Shinjuo. This was called Lulu Heart, and in response to it, several other towers also began to appear around the world. Inside them lived monsters and supernatural beings. In contrast to all this, people with extraordinary powers were born. These began to be called players. They could make the impossible possible. They could change the rules of the human game. And back at our boy's house, the demon in front of him was praising that he had finally woken up. He was still in that panic scene, and the girl replied that he was now a regressor. He asked what that meant, but didn't need further explanation, and understood that he had gone back 6 years into the past. This was the result of the Demon Lord Lulu Heart's power. He still couldn't believe it, but the girl said that with her power, nothing was impossible, and since she had used up all her power, she ended up transforming into that version, a much older and also much cuter version, and honestly, she didn't seem at all familiar with that demon from before. Lulu pointed her hand at the protag, warning that now he had to fulfill his part of the contract. From now on, he must work tirelessly to stop all dungeon breaks. He even wanted to do that, but had no idea how. A dungeon break is a calamity caused by demon lords with the goal of invading Lulu Heart's dungeon, which possessed the greatest magical power in the world, and since they had formed an alliance, they could even defeat her. But only if they conquered all the dungeons in the future. But the protagonist just lowered his head because in reality he was incredibly weak. He was just a loser with no skill at all. And apparently our boy is a side boy since he's there insulting himself. But Lulu asked what difference that made. She didn't care if he was strong or weak. What mattered was whether he had the conviction that he could solve this, and to her all humans were weak. So he didn't need to worry. She would personally train him to become the strongest. Then she closed her eyes and emanated her aura. She extended her hand once again, declaring that he would surpass the limits of humanity and protect Lulu Heart. Then they were taken to the F rank Lemuria. The two were walking in a large hall, and he was excited because it was his first time inside a real dungeon. Then he asked if by any chance this would be the training place. And Lulu, while channeling all her power into her hands, said that he would find out very soon. And in a way he began to sweat cold seeing so much power before him, because she had extended her hands toward the protagonist and then touched his chest, and all that power began to emanate from him as well. His head was spinning, he didn't know what was happening. Lulu infused her power directly into the magical circuits of our protagonist. Even though he was incompetent and skillless, now he could have sensitivity to magic. The protagonist's head was aching, his whole body was burning, and he couldn't think about absolutely anything else. He was beginning to lose complete control over his body. That was because the pain was immense. Even his consciousness was fading, and he only imagined that, if there were no pain, he might be able to endure it. The round table system granted that wish of losing the pain. His unique skill, the Lost Man, was activated. Then he began to reopen his eyes after so much pain, and his skill was activated, informing that the pain had been lost. But since the skill was level 1, its effects and durations would be reduced, and all that enormous power flowing through his magical circuits, the pain simply disappeared, and he could circulate that magic within his body. So this in his hands was mana, Mana was the essential power to use abilities. Before this regression, he had never been able to even feel mana. Then he clenched his fists, because this was so insane and he was boiling with happiness. And Lulu could see the protagonist's skill, saying it was quite convenient, and while channeling mana into her hands, she told him to follow her and use this mana throughout his entire body, from his feet to his head. That was the key to surpass human limits. And all that mana in the protagonist's body began to disperse little by little, because when he tried to control that mana, it simply went out of control. And Lulu honestly wasn't expecting him to succeed on the first try. And well, she seemed surprisingly chill and gave a small laugh, reaffirming that skills didn't matter, and asked what that meant, while a loud roar echoed, and he asked Lulu if by any chance she was hearing that. That was because from one of the doors a huge monster appeared. It was an orc carrying a giant club, and without thinking twice, the protagonist started running away from there. Lulu explained that he had absorbed the mana of a demon lord and that monsters wouldn't stay still once they felt that mana around him. And she gave a big playful grin because the monsters could still devour him. Our boy was just shouting that he had never fought in his entire life. And Lulu gave him a tip: if he infused mana into his feet, he could accelerate. That way he would run even faster. And honestly, that was the only tip she could give for now, while she was there eating her little pie. And the orc wasted no time and swung the club toward the protag. And in desperation, he infused all the mana into his feet. Then he shouted, because the protagonist always needs to shout, right? And something in his DNA began to resonate, and that orc's club hit the ground, but the protagonist had vanished. He managed to run even faster. His body was extremely light, while the air was pushing him from behind. Even Lulu was watching him in that scene. It was strange because for a moment the mana went directly to his feet, even leaving a large footprint where he used that speed. At that moment he felt his entire body burning with that power. So that was it, the mana manipulation Lulu had been talking about. And Lulu just mentioned that he was right to be happy. But while the protagonist looked around, he stated that if he didn't improve immediately, he would die, because several orcs appeared and were thirsty, charging toward the protagonist. He knew that if they hit him, he would die, and indeed that club hit him hard and he was thrown to the ground. And the round table just stated that he would die and that now he wouldn't be able to recover his abilities. The table was going to remove what he had, but at that moment the voice of the demon lord appeared, asking if her dear Can was going to give up. Then above the round table notification, the demon lord's hand appeared, and she completely destroyed that system's plan. A large error alert appeared on the screen, and in the background the demon lord's eyes began to glow. The notification window said what was stopping him from dying was Lulu Hart, and due to the contract between Can and the demon lord, he would return 1 hour into the past. Can woke up totally frightened because he was feeling his head in place again, and Lulu asked if he wanted a recap of the opera. Then she placed her hand on the protagonist's chest, and his entire body was covered in sharp pain. He began grinding his teeth, remembering all that pain. Then he used the lost man's skill, completely losing the pain he was feeling in his body. She quickly warned that he didn't have time to get distracted, because an orc was right behind, so he had to dodge the next strike, and Can was understanding why he had died. And Lulu confirmed it. He was completely smashed by the orc's blow, but the two were bound by the resurrection contract. So when he goes to play for the other team, he will return to life 1 hour before the event. That was something unbelievable for him. In other words, if he doesn't stop the dungeon breaks, he'll stay in this eternal cycle of rebirths, and forever the two will be together in this. There was no way to escape. That meant making a contract with the demon lord. And she asked what the protagonist's answer was as the orc approached from behind, and he infused mana directly into his feet, managing to dodge that massive strike. And Lulu praised that this reaction was much better than the last time, and he was hiding right behind a pillar while taking a deep breath. Lulu began to project a sword with her mana, warning that he had to get stronger and stop running like a rat. He was admiring all that power, but she was right, he couldn't be afraid of simple orcs. Lulu told him to pay attention. The magical circuits inside his body were connected to the magic of this world. That also meant his soul was intertwined with all of it. In other words, the stronger he got, the more magical power he would have under his control. And to get stronger, he needed a great desire flowing from his being. She asked what was the greatest desire inside the heart of our boy, and he remembered the figure of that fire dragon that gave him chills. Then he began to walk toward the orc, because his desire as he looked at Lulu hadn't changed at all since the first time. It was to become stronger. And the orc wasted no time, swinging another blow down at the protagonist, who managed to dodge it just like in the Matrix. He placed his hands on the ground to quickly get up, and like a good protagonist started yelling while charging at the monster. He gripped his small sword with both hands, feeling all the mana overflowing from his body, and delivered a heavy slash that split that orc in half. Smoke was coming out of the protagonist's body, while the monster's body had fallen right behind him. He had finally defeated his first enemy, his first monster, and Lulu praised him, saying he really could do it if he tried. He only managed to do this after dying about 100 times, but it seemed his lost man ability was saving a lot of time. He could only let out an awkward laugh, because he knew what awaited him. Over at that door, several orcs started coming out, Then without hesitation, the protagonist used mana on his feet and made a great leap over that horde. He could feel the magical circuits inside his body awakening again, and once more with the protagonist's shout, he brought his sword down in the middle of an orc. Right after, he managed to dodge an attack. His body was following his imagination, strong and clean movements, and then he managed to defeat 10 orcs. 10 monsters were scattered around, and Lulu praised him, saying that was very good for a beginner, but she still didn't celebrate. And the protagonist commented that if he kept going at this pace, he would become stronger, until a loud scream came from the back of the door, but that scream wasn't from a monster. Then a man holding a blade dripping with ketchup was seen saying that if that girl had abandoned those 2 idiots, she could have escaped. That was the same girl we met in the first chapter, Sarah, who is now ranked F, and it seemed that man was confronting her while raising that butter knife, because his target was Sarah. But who appeared at that same moment was our protagonist, blocking that attack and asking the bastard what he was trying to do. And the man questioned who the little boy was, trying to stop him. Sora warned that psychopath would kill everyone and told him to run immediately. And the protagonist managed to recognize the girl right behind, because she was the one who had helped him escape that situation the day before. The man just laughed when he saw the boy didn't have much experience, and started attacking him from several different angles, laughing loudly. Can was already exhausted because he had fought several orcs before, and this man in front of him was quite strong, using Terror Wave level 3, and a dominant aura began to invade the protagonist. He was feeling the fear status. That was a huge debuff against that man. His body couldn't move now, and this man used his little butter knife and charged at the protagonist, managing to stab it into his stomach. He felt an intense pain, and his gaze pulsed. But the man wasn't worried about Can, and began to move toward that girl. The man just joked that he was curious to learn about the other's abilities while driving his blade into another guy, a scene that left the protagonist wide-eyed. This man was truly a psychopath, because he wanted those bodies to learn better abilities, and kept playing with his victims. The protagonist was frustrated by his weakness, because in the edge of that blade he could see it. She must have been suffering a lot, and even with difficulty, he shouted for that man to stop doing that. After all, she had saved him, and now he couldn't do anything to help her. This psychopath approached the protagonist with the blade already in hand, and the rage overflowed in Can. His eyes were screaming with hatred. He needed more power, and the notification window warned that he died once again. But because of his contract with the Demon Lord, he would return 1 hour into the past. And the moment he returned, he asked Lulu Heart for a favor, and she smiled, saying he could ask her for whatever he wanted. And the protagonist just stood up, asking her to make him strong enough. Didn't matter how many times I'd be sent to play for other teams, and Lulu really liked that determination. Honestly, she didn't care at all about the girl in the other room. Then we were taken back to that crazy man from before, and he was saying that whole Machiavellian line. That was it. She was already pretty weakened after the fight. And it was at that moment that he was jumping toward her and the girl didn't know where to run. And it was at the exact moment when our protagonist appeared and managed to block that blade once again. And the man asked who he was, and if by any chance he was protecting that little girl, he should run away because his target was only those rookies. The protagonist in turn looked back and told the girl to leave and let him stay there. And once again the round table recorded the fall of our hero. And while he was falling, he understood that the real reason Sarah was suffering so much was himself. Since he had defeated all the orcs in that dungeon, they didn't attack that small group, and to illustrate that, he ended up fighting the orcs several times and could no longer return to the entrance point of that dungeon. If he hadn't taken so long to defeat the orcs, maybe he could have saved her. All the problems in that dungeon began the moment he stepped inside, and once again the round table recorded his fall. Lulu explained that our hero was very bad with the sword. That's why he ended up dying once again. And now he should pay more attention to the fight, especially his feet. He also couldn't concentrate all his mana and kept losing focus. He had to pay attention to the mana the opponent was using, and that way he could anticipate their movements. He should calculate all his strength and counterattack at the right moment. At one point, Sarah asked why he was going so far for them, and in one of those returns, Lulu asked if by any chance he wasn't afraid of going to the other side, and his answer was that he wasn't, because he had nothing to lose, and if I could give my own life to save someone, I would. Lulu really liked that answer, and if he gave up now, the dungeon break would still happen in the future, and thousands of people would cease to exist because of the destruction. So if only he suffered and could give his own life to save everyone, he would do it. And the Demon Lord couldn't answer the boy because he had died again. She had already seen countless people abandoning their comrades in dungeons. But why? Because that boy was different. He had a unique light that sacrificed itself for others, and no matter how many times he needed to be revived, he kept moving forward without stopping. That psychopath at one moment praised our protagonist. He was the first person who managed to keep up, but Khan realized that man wasn't fighting with all he had. That was funny because in front of him a pile of bodies was forming. Those were his bodies. It seemed like he was doing all of this for nothing. Then he stood up once again, frowned, and no longer wanted to go through the pain of rebirth. Lulu just crossed her arms. Honestly, she wasn't expecting our protagonist to get this far. Then she pointed her hand, stating that she would tell the missing piece for the protagonist's evolution. He had only gotten this far because he was strong, but his expression didn't seem pleased about that. In fact, he even lowered his head because he knew he was still weak. He was just like his past self, a true no talent without mana, and unable to do anything. But still he kept returning and returning after so much pain. He couldn't abandon that small girl and simply run away. Khan looked straight at the Demon Lord, and she told him that the key to all of this was exactly what he was doing. He kept fighting and losing, and even so he chose to fight, and that's precisely why he would become stronger. Then once again she pointed her finger toward the protagonist, declaring that the Demon Lord recognized his strength and asked with all that radiant aura if by any chance he would keep that depressed look on his face. He should now stand up, lift his head, and clench his fist. Khan felt motivated and rose as the man in front of him came his way. Our protagonist could now read the movements of that blade, and at the moment he dodged, that psychopath's eyes went wide. Khan managed to change the angle of his sword and deflected that blade with full force. His sword handling was firmer and also beautiful, and at that moment he could cut that guy. The Demon Lord still asked how long he planned to stay weak. He should accept his destiny of being strong. The protagonist could read the movements of that crazy man. At the moment he moved his foot back, he launched a straight attack. Then a horizontal slash followed, and finally an upward kick, and he managed to dodge it. And the psychopath was getting scared because this boy was reading all his movements, which was strange because a minute ago this boy posed no threat and the protagonist's eyes were shining. He was determined. The first time he faced that man, he couldn't even hold the sword properly, but now this man, who was skilled with the dagger, was being pushed back and slashed. Kan realized the moment had come, then raised his sword, and his unique skill, the Lost Man, was activated, completely nullifying the effects of the fear that man caused. Then he struck with his sword from top to bottom, but the psychopath just yelled that he was open while releasing mana from his hands. He used his level 3 Fear Wave ability, but that was nothing to Kan, who had already nullified that ability, and that crazy man's eyes went wide, not understanding how his ability had been dispersed. But that was great, because this boy was getting closer and he couldn't escape his dagger, but the Lost Man ability had been activated. The protagonist nullified any pain he could feel, and even with that blade piercing through, his expression was one of a serene smile. And the psychopath realized that there was an even worse psychopath standing before him because Kan held that blade so the man wouldn't have an opening. And now he was more than terrified because that boy was really predicting all his movements and not letting anything slip. And finally the protagonist succeeded. After all the times he had to resurrect, he finally managed to get close to that man. And that guy asked who the hell our protagonist was, but without giving an answer, Kan simply stated that it was the end while his sword pierced the man, and while crawling he couldn't believe he lost to such a weak guy. And Kan replied that he had lost 187 times to him. While pointing his sword, he stated that in the end, he came out victorious. After that, Sarah's guild members arrived at that place and helped our big guy. She also apologized and thanked our protagonist deeply for saving them, but she was surprised by his answer because he was happy that nobody died and it seemed like he managed to save the 3 people who were there as well. Already outside the dungeon, Lulu was saying that it took quite a long time inside, but in the end our protagonist did an excellent job and he couldn't respond. He just cried with emotion, thanking the Demon Lord, who only asked why the boy was crying. After all, the difficult things hadn't even started yet. His final goal is to defeat the dungeon break that would happen in the future. He will need to surpass his limits and reach rank S, which humans call the strongest. Then she raised her hands, stating that our boy will overcome this and become a Demon Lord level player. And he could only laugh about all that, but still, that title wasn't bad at all, and he said to Lulu that he would become even more powerful than her, and would do his best to surpass her and change that entire future. Thus, the next day, they went to the Sinjuo Player Association. The protagonist was registering as a player. The agent who was guiding him noticed that this boy was really different. Besides defeating the orcs, he defeated that psychopath the association had been hunting for months, but still, it was his first day registering as a player. On top of that, he was quite suspicious. After all, how did he even manage to enter a dungeon? And the protagonist widened his eyes when the machine started saying his data. Better than all that, the round table was improving his attributes as well. After all, he contributed a lot to the last dungeon, and he was very happy because now he just needed to choose his class. Then minutes later, inside the association, Sarah appeared apologizing for the delay, and she was stunning, with a whole entourage around her asking if by any chance she was too late. And for a moment, our big guy forgot. But Sarah was the daughter of a great conglomerate. Before the regression, she and her sister were considered geniuses. Both were rank S. Sarah's ability was very famous. She possessed the Eye of Truth. This power allowed her to see through falsehoods. She could also see every feint performed in battle. And again, she thanked him for his deeds yesterday. If it weren't for him, all her companions wouldn't have survived the attacks of that psychopath. and she approached affectionately saying that our boy was her hero. So they went inside the cafe and the protagonist asked her to explain about the classes that existed among players. She explained that it was like a professional branch of work. He could choose between physical, magical, or mental types. The physical types evolved into warriors or knights. The magical types could go into mages or priests. The mental ones could become alchemists or summoners. It wasn't that our protagonist didn't know. In fact, before the regression, he was a nerd in this area. Sarah had reached the level of a blade master. Her main skill was counterattack. She also warned that the most important thing was to choose a class that matched his abilities. If he could combine his profession along with his abilities, he would have double the power. Now, if he chose his abilities with the wrong class, it wouldn't be effective. No one knew what our hero's classes were, but he should choose carefully. And not even he knew what to choose. After all his unique ability, the lost man didn't fit into any of them. And Lulu was impressed that humans had created such complex classes. That said, she apologized but needed to perform her first class evolution today, and she said goodbye for a moment and returned a few hours later, announcing that she would become a blade master or a paladin. The protagonist widened his eyes because she had several options. That was the same as being considered a genius. But of all the classes she chose maid, and well, I don't know if that made much sense to our protagonist. The maid class was also rank S and combined elegant magic with technical and calculated combat. Which was strange because Sarah used the Blade Master class, which is rank A, but she made that choice based on the protagonist. After all, she was inspired by how he helped them in that dungeon, and he was very happy since her choice was based on his attributes. Now it was our big guy's turn to choose his class, and before his regression, he didn't even have the chance to reach that room. He had no idea what options would appear, so he placed his hand on that mechanism. The system started talking to him, but the round table interrupted, and an error occurred on the screen. He wondered if that was a malfunction of the whole thing. Then the system returned, saying it was redefining his class. Even Lulu stared at that mechanism, and after so many recalculations they finally managed to choose the protagonist's class. And he stared fixedly at the message on the screen because his class was Soul Devourer. It was an EX plus rank class, one that could use the power of the Demon Lord Soul Devourer. And he couldn't understand what that class was doing there besides the fact that several soul-related abilities had been unlocked. But who was even more shocked was Lulu, saying that all those abilities were hers. Even the Demon Lord was wondering what her abilities were doing there on the round table. That system had been entirely developed by the round table. All the abilities were compatible with hers, all of them from darkness. The protagonist returned and informed that he had obtained the Soul Devourer ability, and it was an ability he had never heard of before. Sarah had never heard of it either. Maybe it was a unique class of our protagonist. Lulu said it was an excellent moment. He should challenge Sarah to a battle. He should challenge her and test his new abilities. So he called her to the arena and was shocked because Sarah was already wearing maid clothes. She was dazzling. Even her hair was flowing inside a closed place. That's what I call protagonism. And there were even people shining lights on her because it wasn't possible for her to glow that much. And she was extremely excited about those new battle outfits. Several players showed up since they heard that little Sarah was fighting. The agent from before was announcing that the fight between them would begin. The two challengers were now at rank E. The protagonist had no idea that his abilities could cause such a battle, so he used Soul Judgment and his magic abilities were greatly amplified, but his stamina was lost as a debuff. However, he managed to use the Lost Man to nullify all that stamina loss. And Lulu joked that his power was grand, but it came with a few small disadvantages. Sarah asked if he was done using his class abilities, and that now they would begin. And she completely fixed her gaze, changing the entire aura around her. And the protagonist felt that she was coming at him with everything she had. The maid class could manifest different magical armaments, and in her hands were 3 daggers. The protagonist managed to deflect those 3 weapons around him, but Sarah was already gripping her katana and managed to unsheath it, and the two clashed their weapons. The protagonist couldn't use feints because the girl possessed those eyes, the eyes that could see all falsehoods. Then another dagger was thrown, and Can had to dodge at the last moment. He faced the girl again, and she was drawing more armament. She was coming at him, so he needed to focus. The Lost Man was used again, and the fear he was feeling was nullified. Sarah launched several daggers in Can's direction, and now without fear of those weapons he managed to dodge, and she couldn't believe that all her attacks had been dodged so easily. And right in front of her the protagonist was holding his sword, and he delivered a powerful strike, but it was defended. She felt all that impact and was thrown far away. The players around were completely excited to see all that. The magical power was overflowing through our boy's circuits. Sarah could tell that the protagonist didn't have decent sword skills, but he was already running at her once again. Even without skills, his attacks felt like a tsunami. He had much more experience as a player, and also as a duelist. But why was he only using physical abilities? Then she gave a slight smirk as the protagonist leapt into the air and she used the maid's cooking ability. Around her an explosion of flames was created. Can had no idea that the maid class could use fire magic. She explained that no one was better with fire than the maid herself. She extended her hands, stating that she was going to cook him completely, and Can was feeling all that heat invading his surroundings. He tried to fight those blazing flames with his sword. She didn't even look like that defenseless girl from the dungeon, and amid all those fire flames she still drew her blades and remained impressed with the eyes of our boy. Even under so many attacks didn't avert his gaze. Can managed to parry those blades once again, but one of them ended up hitting his arm and cutting it, and she simply stated that it was the end, that she was going to win, but he wasn't going to give up as he clenched his eyes. He used the mana flowing through his entire body, used the Lost Man to nullify all the pain in his body, and did that at the moment when Sarah used a powerful kick from his side. And that kick reverberated with the mana that was in the protagonist, but he didn't feel any pain due to his abilities. And she was shocked because that was supposed to have stunned him. She asked if by any chance he didn't feel pain and if he was even human, and without answering, the protagonist swung his sword sideways. The round table warned that our protagonist's health had dropped below 50%, and because of that, the condition for the Abyssal Soul ability was activated. His magical power increased greatly, and Sarah noticed that the moment her dagger was struck, Can's attacks were even more severe and powerful. She was no longer able to block any of the attacks, and the protagonist positioned himself so that he could strike her from below upward. And the moment he did that, the girl went flying across the gymnasium and the agent declared that the duel was over. Sarah had already expected that she was completely defeated and also extended her hands in a gesture of respect. The protagonist praised her, saying that she would probably become one of the greatest players in the future, but she ended up feeling a bit down and screamed in frustration. And he didn't understand that, and she asked what those crazy movements in front of her blades were. The blades could have pierced through in the middle of all that action, and it seems that this girl is much more expressive than she used to be. She was already planning how to counterattack those movements, but the most interesting part is that next time she wouldn't lose. And is that for sure? The protagonist just looked at that positively and gave a little smile, saying that next time he would definitely win again. The next day we are taken to Raum's dungeon. Lulu brought him there because this was an excellent place to test the Soul Devourer's abilities. It was a very easy dungeon, so the goal was to ensure victory, and Can entered that dungeon already emanating his aura. And for some reason Lulu gave a slight smile right behind him. Something was waiting for our protagonist inside that place. And indeed it was, because outside a storm began to form and some association agents were there, since the place our protagonist entered had turned into a red dungeon. And inside that dungeon our boy was slicing through some knights. Those knights in fact were living armors, and he almost got caught in one of the strikes but managed to dodge once again. And at the right moment he delivered a lateral slash and knocked off the armor's helmet. Without wasting time he moved to the next opponent and was already staggering from exhaustion, asking if this was really a ranked dungeon. And Lulu could sense that this place had turned into a red portal. In these portals, monsters entered a berserker stage, and their powers were greatly increased. So she gave another smile, because would this be very good for her boy's growth? This would be very interesting to watch. She just laughed, saying that she had prepared great training for him, that his Soul Devourer ability was automatically activated upon eliminating an enemy, and he was absorbing the mana of the opponent he had just defeated. And by capturing that mana, his power began to increase. Lulu explained that by consuming the monster's souls, that would become his own mana. And the more enemies he managed to defeat, the more powerful he would become. And she knew what she was talking about. After all, she was the true bearer of that power, but now the second part of his own power would begin. Then she threw a flaming orb toward the protagonist, and when he touched it, his soul cultivation ability was activated, and the round table began to discuss his evolution. And with that, he obtained the soul of the knight armor. And Can was wondering what that was, and Lulu explained that he was a cheap copy of Solo Levelin, and the protagonist tried doing it by infusing his mana, and his ability really managed to create a knight. It was a summoning ability. Lulu explained that it wasn't just any summoning, that was the materialization of mana. In other words, it was the same as creating life. Obviously he was shocked to hear that, and when he looked at Lulu in such a small and cute form, he forgot for a moment that she was one of the most powerful demon lords that existed. Next, his materialized soul was fighting against the opponents, and while his ability distracted them, he managed to leap behind those enemies and defeat them with a precise strike from their flanks. And with each enemy he defeated, he could absorb one more soul. It seemed like that collection could be infinite, and the little demon girl praised that he was getting good at doing that. But with his current level he could only summon them for a few minutes, and Lulu liked that. It seemed that this boy was understanding things without even needing explanation. Then going deeper into an arena within the dungeon, he managed to capture 3 knight armor souls. That wasn't bad at all for her, and right in front of them a great knight emerged amid the flames. And no, it wasn't Igris. The protagonist challenged him because this was his first real boss, and the two faced each other head on. Let's go to the S-Rank Guild of No Flowers, and a girl was running with some files. She had urgent information about that guy, and the one there was the guild leader Sakurako. And the assistant mentioned that the round dungeon had turned into a red portal. and Sakurako just joked that this was very painful for whoever was inside, that they should send B-class players. But the most important thing was that a rookie player was inside, and Sakurako found that name familiar but gave a small smile, saying that no one cared about an E-rank player and that her assistant should do the usual. She handed over a list of those who had approached Sarah in the past few days, and Sakurako became extremely angry with those trash getting close to her precious little sister. That was when her eyes fixated on one name, asking who the hell that was in the photo, and the assistant mentioned that it was the boy who had met her at the afternoon cafe, and that's why she recognized Kan's name. He was the bastard who had challenged her sister and beaten her in combat. Rage was taking over Sakurako because that boy was nothing but trash, an insect trying to get close to her beloved little sister. Heading into the boss's room, our protagonist was already on his 24th attempt, and Lulu asked how much longer he was going to take because it was getting quite tiring. She knew that this wasn't a regular boss. He was super strong due to the excess mana in that modified portal, and Kan wondered if this was really the right portal they had entered. And the girl joked that if he really wanted to become strong, he should defeat that enemy, and the protagonist just yelled that he was an idiot for having to trust her, but he managed to dodge the blow that was coming his way. He faced the monster again because all of its attacks were extremely powerful. If he took even one hit, he would surely die, but now he was able to watch the movements and counter them. And the monster realized that the boy was getting used to its strikes. Then he decided to approach with a punch, and the Lost Man's ability was activated. The protagonist reduced all the pain he would suffer, and then took the impact of that punch, and because of that he lost at least 50% of his HP, and his Soul Devourer abilities were activated. The mana flowing through his body was greatly increased. Now was when the true battle against this monster began. He used the Soul Commander ability and manifested his Knight's Soul. He ordered them not to attack but only to defend. Kan knew his armor wouldn't be able to defeat that boss. It was just a distraction, but it would be enough to approach from the flank and manage to strike from behind. The moment he did that, the boss quickly turned toward the protagonist. With that attention, he summoned the other armor too, and it appeared right behind the boss. But the big monster kept going after the protagonist, ignoring the armors, and they were now attacking the boss's back. And it was exhausting for our boy to fight while having to give commands to the armors. And once again, Lulu was admiring the growth of this boy because he wasn't any kind of brilliant genius, but he pushed himself to his limits and thus evolved. Back at the No Flowers mansion, Sakurako was somewhat satisfied since the red portal appeared where Kan was. The difficulty against the enemies inside was something a beginner would never be able to overcome. While tearing Kan's photo, she stated that he was no longer a problem. The insect was just an insect and affirmed to her assistant that insects should not approach her dear Sarah. And the assistant just gave a small smile because that woman seemed a bit crazy, but Sakurako was thoughtful after receiving the report of her sister's duel against that man and started wondering, and what if just a beginner E-rank managed to finish a red portal? And the protagonist was increasing his strength even more due to the buffs he was receiving. He was even nullifying all pain and fear against that boss. His eyes were shining because his life was down to only 10%. With that, all the mana he could gather was at its limit. And then with a severe sword strike toward the boss, and with Lulu watching all of that with a super excited face, and Sakurako imagining if that boy could make history, several gazes around the world were staring at this red portal, and in a way no one expected, the protagonist managed to defeat Romura, the Flame Warrior. The protagonist obtained the Ring of Flames and also the Knight's Soul, returning to the No Flowers Guild, and they reported Kan's great feat to the guild leader. Everyone was apprehensive about it, but it seemed that he really managed to defeat the boss of that dungeon. They also informed that he was the one responsible for stopping a psychopath named Akizuki. This boy was a peculiar piece to the leader. After all, he had defeated her sister and seemed to have no fear of risking himself by going alone into a dungeon. His eyes certainly exuded madness. Then she gave a faint smile because he was interesting. She ordered the creation of a task force to find out everything about that boy, and if he was truly a valuable bet, they should bring him to Hilda, and she gave the mission to Shik, stating that he should do the best possible job. And that young man there felt the leader's pressure and got close to her face, warning that he didn't like failures, and the entire investigation about that new boy would be in his hands. And Shik just clenched his fists, affirming that he would do his best, and she just joked while thinking that it was too easy to control that boy. If she ordered, he could even wipe out Kan. She was really interested to see what he was going to do next. Thus a week passed, and our protagonist was invited by that little group to enter the dungeon. Sarah was there inviting him and introduced the members present, and Sheik was in command. The two greeted each other while the other group members were watching that. Sarah told everyone that Kan was the one responsible for clearing that red portal, and he just joked that it was only a lucky strike. Another player mentioned that he was the group's favorite rookie, including the mage, who just nodded. And the old man there gave a long smile because he seemed quite promising. And that whole little group gathered around the protagonist to greet him, and it seemed that the atmosphere around our boy was very positive, except for Feek, who was staring at him with ferocity in his eyes, and they entered the D-rank dungeon, the Vine. And inside there, an army of undead was marching. And it was truly an army to the point of suffocating our little group. Cheek ordered them to maintain formation, but the warrior mentioned that it wasn't the moment for them to stay in strategic formation. They were in a very dangerous situation. The number of warriors was overwhelming them. They were even using the Breath of Decay. The oldest player knew they wouldn't be able to maintain formation together. Right behind, one of the skeletons was pointing a weapon at him. The man knew he would lose an arm if he continued that movement until the opponent was completely cut down by the protagonist's sword, who then immediately went to help his companion, and the two managed to keep covering each other. Cheek was in the background watching that so they wouldn't disobey his commands. Can knew those orders were just nonsense, and then he began to activate his lost man abilities, and also asked Lulu to inject her mana into him to attract the monsters. And she began to do that, injecting her mana directly into our boy. And the protagonist's strength was increasing, as well as the attraction of the monsters. They were sensing the scent of that delicious mana. But the Demon Lord was indignant, asking how our protagonist was calling her Lulu. After all, her real name was Lulu Hart, but he completely ignored it and charged toward the pile of monsters. And Lulu kept pouting since we nicknamed her Lulu Xena. The Soul Devourer was enhancing the protagonist's abilities, and he was managing to fight several enemies alone, until right behind him, one of the enemies breathed its poison. However, the Lost Man's ability nullified the poison, and he felt all the venom leaving his body and managed to regenerate his health. This was another status given by the Round Table due to his unique ability. That way he could fight even more fiercely against those monsters. And compared to that red dungeon, these enemies were much weaker and slower. Right behind, one of his companions asked if that boy was really an E rank, and the knight saw that the boy was indeed strong. It wasn't just luck that made him close a red portal, and the protagonist was focusing even more power. His gaze was extremely sharp. He could tear through all the monsters in his path without any kind of problem, finishing off the last one of that small horde. That caused a kind of indignation among the people around, because even after defeating so many, the protagonist turned to everyone and asked if they were okay. And it's good, of course they were. After all, he handled them all by himself. He joked that he could only do it because the others were protecting his rear, and Sheik wasn't liking that at all. This rookie was making him look like an idiot in front of everyone. His order had been very clear. He should prove himself more capable than Can. But this boy was certainly being superior in everything. Then he shouted at the protagonist that he was doing everything wrong and not following his orders, and Can said that his orders were completely stupid. They were out of formation, and Sheik got angry because he was being talked back to. One of the players stepped in to defend the protagonist, but Sheik complained again that because of reckless people like them, dungeons would fail, and the two started arguing like children. Sheik stated that he was there under the orders of his leader Sakurako, and that the others should respect that since he was being protected by an S rank. And the group began to lower their heads at that, and Sheik bit his lips, and the protagonist only saw that this discussion wouldn't lead anywhere and asked everyone to calm down. Sarah also confirmed that they should pull themselves together and go deeper into the dungeon, and since Sarah was the one speaking, Sheik agreed. Lulu just pointed out that this boy was quite terrible, but the worst of all was the protagonist for giving her the nickname Lulu Xena, and he just stated that it was a cute and easy name to say. And that was it, there was no other explanation. And the girl just agreed, saying he could do whatever he wanted. But the most important part was that they shouldn't forget to collect the monsters' souls. He just nodded that he would do that. Not many meters ahead, the path split into two. For some reason, Sheik kept staring at our protagonist, even though he was quietly minding his own business. The responsibility Sheik carried was enormous. He didn't want to disappoint his leader and stated that everyone should split into two groups to better explore the place. Some liked the idea, but the protagonist asked if that wouldn't be too dangerous. Yet Sheik just ignored him and called the other girl to his group. He also called the other two. After all, they would form a perfect team. And the big guy said it was fine. After all, that guy was still the leader. And Can shouldn't worry because he would protect everyone. And the protagonist just looked at that with apprehension in his eyes. Sheik called for Kato and whispered that he should keep an eye on Can's movements. And Kato could only imagine that his leaders were overthinking about that boy and honestly just wanted to go home and rest. Thus, Group A was formed by those 4 troublemakers, while Group B was formed by the protagonist and those 3 extras. Then the groups split and began entering each room. Not many meters ahead, the protagonist group had already started fighting, and using his buff abilities along with Lulu's, attracting all the monsters to the protagonist, he managed to tank that entire horde of monsters and also defeat them, since he was alone on the front line. Sarah was right behind, providing cover with her fire magic. The rapier player also managed to eliminate the enemies left on the flank. The big skeleton there breathed another wave of poison over the protagonist's head, but thanks to his poison nullifying abilities, he counterattacked, defeating the monsters. Kato couldn't believe it because the monster's aggro was perfectly directed at the protagonist, and no one was going after him, while he kept providing cover with his ice spears against the enemies. He wondered how Can managed to stay so calm in front of so many enemies around him. He kept giving cover while the protagonist defeated the enemies right ahead. One of the skeletons released its soul, and the protagonist managed to collect it. Finally dropped an item like that after so long. and the rapier girl was celebrating that everything was really easy in that room and that Kan was truly a natural leader. Even Kaito praised him for all that bravery. That also showed that his little group was perfect. They were very well coordinated, and Kan just thanked everyone for the compliments. He didn't do anything special. He was more concerned about collecting the monster's souls since Lulu had asked earlier. Sarah asked if it wouldn't be time for them to take a break after all they'd been fighting for 2 hours. But when they looked at the entrance door, they saw Sheik and that magic girl and asked why the two were there alone. And Sheik said that the others had gone to get something they had forgotten, and the protagonist asked again where the others were, because that was very suspicious. And Sheik just turned around saying that they had split up to take care of other monsters. This was the perfect moment for Sarah to use her special ability. And indeed she did that and pointed at the protagonist while shaking her head saying that he was lying. Then she asked if he had really abandoned his companions behind, and Sheik claimed that they were completely fine, but once again Sarah noticed that it was a lie and shouted that their companions were in danger right now. Without thinking twice, the protagonist started running. He knew that the other path was dangerous because of the mana emanating from it, but he was counting on that night to protect the girl and hoped they were okay. He asked Lulu if she could track Yamamoto and that girl, but it wasn't possible due to the current range of her magic. In other words, Sheik was lying, so he needed to be careful with him. Kan started speeding up even more and saw some enemies ahead, and it seemed he was on the right path, managing to knock them down like bowling pins. And he got another guardian soul while worrying about Yamamoto, until they were led to a large red door, and Yamamoto was extremely tired. He didn't expect to find the boss room right now, and it seemed that Sheik had indeed abandoned the others to call his guild. The girl didn't want to do that but was coerced and could only apologize to Ihi while she was unconscious on the ground, and Yamamoto was disappointed. He hoped that at least they had taken that girl far away, and in front of him a large undead knight was coming. He wasn't going to be able to withstand the next blows from that huge axe and could only see that this was his end. Then he placed his hands on his chest and asked for forgiveness because he wouldn't be able to return to his daughters, but it was at that moment that his ring began to shine. Then he opened his eyes once again and looking forward was surprised because the one defending against that attack was Kan, who apologized for taking so long to arrive and save him, saying that now he should rescue the girl lying on the ground and leave that monster to him. But Yamamoto was so tired that he just fainted. Kan had to lure that huge monster in another direction. Lulu asked our hero to be careful. The monsters in that dungeon were indeed weaker, but she could feel an enormous concentration coming from that monster. It was probably converting all the dungeon's magic into itself. Kan stated that he wouldn't let his guard down. The monster started advancing once again toward the protagonist and then swung that powerful axe in his direction. Kan watched the blade's edge pass close to his face. That monster was extremely fast. At the right moment he managed to grab his sword and struck that huge axe again. But the two stared at each other. The monster simply wasn't moving. That was because both its axe and its body were extremely heavy. Kan managed to throw the axe away and noticed there was an opening in that monster trying to slash it with a horizontal strike, but the boss raised its axe at that instant, and once again the protagonist had to dodge while defending himself from that blow. It seemed the difference in stats was extremely large. He couldn't deal even the slightest damage to it. He needed more mana to defeat that monster. He began activating the Soul Devourer's buffs and attacked again. Lulu was impressed by the Lost Man's ability because it was quite convenient. The ability complemented everything our boy lacked. His mana was increasing even more while it drained everything from his body. The blades clashed and the noise was thunderous. The more the protagonist lost, the more power he gained, and now he could see a clear chance to win. He managed to deflect the next axe strike. His attacks were working, so he needed to use even more mana. Kan had already lost 5 senses, but it was at that moment that everything turned white. It seemed that everything in front of him simply froze. It was the round table intervening and saying that our protagonist was losing his humanity, and his head was now shaking uncontrollably. And Lulu was frightened because it was a terrible moment. And the boss of that room certainly didn't waste time. It struck the protagonist's abdomen and sent him flying into the wall behind, and the protagonist crashed with such intense pain that his entire body was trembling. Lulu approached, warning that his unique ability was consuming his humanity. Every time he used it and lost a sense, he also lost what was most essential to him as a human. And Lulu saw for the first time the expression of despair on Kan's face. That was because he was disappearing completely from her sight. Her voice couldn't reach him to warn that if he continued using that ability, his existence would vanish. And if his existence and his soul disappeared together, he would no longer be able to resurrect. She had no other choice, so she closed her eyes and began channeling her power. She opened a large magic circle in the hall. The boss of that place became terrified of the power emanating from Lulu. She simply told the boss of that place to keep his eyes open because she would be his special opponent. While she went to fight the boss of that dungeon, she hoped that Kan could overcome the trial of his soul. And the protagonist's eyes were no longer in this world. He was seeing something else. Suddenly he found himself submerged in a sea. He remembered the time he was called talentless, the times he was humiliated, told he couldn't be a player because he was too weak. All the people around him saying he should stop chasing that dream and that he should run away as soon as possible looked back that amateurs like him would only end up died. The bad memories were filling our boy, and he was just below this ocean of memories. And in front of him another self appeared, saying that this was the trial of the soul. Kan was startled to see his own reflection, and it seemed that Lulu knew he would have to face something like this, and asked if by any chance this was part of the Soul Devourer's abilities. The reflection explained that the soul's trial fulfilled one's deepest desires, and with that granted even more power. However, Kan completely ignored those desires. He ignored them due to his unique ability, the Lost Man. But now he had to confront everything left in the past, all the emotions he had lost, and prove his own worth. But the reflection told him to give up because he had nothing and no desires. He was simply a loser who kept losing everything. And on the other side, the boss of that place was growing stronger. Lulu was still very weak due to the regression she performed in the world. She was having trouble with such a simple monster. She was even sent flying after an impact. She knew it would be hard to fight in this body without magic. It was so pathetic for a demon lord to lose to such a weak monster. But setting aside all that frustration, she couldn't appear weak in front of him. While Kan was facing his own trial within his mind, she had to fight this monster, and that big beast was raising its axe once again. And Lulu dodged with a big smile on her face. Her goal was to draw all the attention away from Kan. She was certain that her protagonist would be able to prove his own worth and return much stronger. And within his memories, Kan was wondering how he could prove his worth, but he gave a long smile, asking if that was all. While the reflection asked why he was laughing like an idiot, Kan said that he had lived his entire life in the wrong way and might lose everything trying to move forward. But everything changed from the moment he met Lulu Hart. At that moment, all the bad memories and also all the memories of overcoming, due to everything he had lived before the regression, managed to connect with the Demon Lord, and that's why he gained the chance to save the world this time. Indeed, there might be nothing inside his soul and his life might be completely wrong, but surely his choices were not wrong. As mana projected from his hand, and he shouted that he would stop the fall of the future's Dangel and save this entire world and all people. While his hand was on the reflection's face, absorbing all the power from the trial. Thus, the Lost Man's unique ability was reactivated. The protagonist's existence was once again acknowledged by the Round Table, and Lulu could feel it because the Lost Man and she shared the same fate, and their hands intertwined with great power. Through his overcoming, the protagonist gained Lulu Hart's magical essence, and then an entire wall shattered, showing that the protagonist's existence was real. And there in the boss's hall, Lulu was facing the great attack coming her way. She joked that Kan had kept her waiting for too long. That was because he quickly came to defend her from that attack and apologized for taking so long, but she could go rest now. And she asked if he had managed to decide about the Lost Man, and he answered yes while throwing the monster away. He told Lulu that there was only one answer, and she was very curious to know, but first they had to defeat that opponent. And Kan was tired of the same attacks coming at him over and over and asked if the big monster wouldn't change formation by any chance. And the beast just stared at him with a dumb face, having been hit in a different way. The soul's trial had managed to surpass 5 levels of the protagonist's power. The cost was very high, but the effects were tremendous. And it wasn't as if the protagonist didn't enjoy it, because now it was time for his counterattack. Our hero rushed toward the monster, and now his strikes were so powerful they sent the boss backward. His eyes were focused. He knew he would win. With one strike, he managed to tear off the enemy's arm, and impressively, the skeleton groaned for having its bone arm ripped off. And with all that rage, it charged at the protagonist. The Lost Man's ability was activated, and his senses were enhanced, and once again he dodged with millimetric precision. He could quickly evade the blows without any difficulty, so he channeled all the mana into his feet, and delivered a kick to the boss that sent the monster dragging across the hall. This was the same kick he learned from Sarah. The boss of that place seemed to be entering berserker mode. Its aura was also increasing as it raised its axe. It summoned several minions to fight, but Lulu unleashed her entire aura, telling those little rats to chase her. And the protagonist asked what she was trying to do, and obviously she was opening the way for our hero to face the enemy. He just gave a smile and thanked her and joked with that big skeleton that summoning wasn't a privilege only of his, while raising his hands and activating his ability, materializing the souls of several warriors to his side. And they went to help Lulu fight those enemies while Kan was going directly to the boss. Once again, the two clashed their weapons and a loud bang was caused, and Lulu stated that her time was over and she disappeared, becoming only a mass of mana. The protagonist could feel that she had spent a lot of mana and needed to rest. She was completely worn out for her current state. From now on, there was no more chance to lose, so he focused even more of his attention, and with even more strength managed to crack the giant axe, and Lulu shouted that he should win as soon as possible. And with the famous roar of protagonism that increased his strength, he completely shattered that axe and the skeleton's armor in half. Sarah and the group entered the room minutes later, and the protagonist was already on the ground, thankful that they had arrived. The group was terrified, asking if he had really managed to defeat the boss of that place alone. Sarah noticed that the protagonist was all beaten up, but more importantly, they needed to help Yamamoto and Easy, who were lying there on the ground. However, Chick arrived at that moment and told everyone not to move. His dagger was close to the girl, stating that her life was in his hands, and they asked what the hell he was trying to do. And the boy began trembling with rage, claiming that it was all Khan's fault. He should have perished in this battle against that boss, and pointed at the protagonist, accusing him of being a filthy bastard and saying he was there to prove he was better than that insect. Sarah told him to stop being such an idiot and pull himself together, and Chick was there under orders from his leader. Sarah said she would talk to her sister personally, but Chick warned that Sakurako would never forgive him if he failed this mission, and everyone looked down as if they knew her power. Then he pointed his finger at the protagonist, stating that they should fight right now. The others tried to stop it, but the protagonist, even weakened, was getting up. He could feel the aura of that boy, so he would respond as well. And Chick became furious and went after us with the intention of killing our hero. He clashed his blade against the protagonist and only wanted to win because then Lady Sakurako would acknowledge him. So he kept attacking non-stop, even knowing Khan was injured from the battle. He was going to show the difference in rankings because he was a rank C, so he was stronger, but as he kept striking so many times, that boy continued surpassing him. At that moment, the protagonist's life dropped below 10%. With that, the Abyss Soul was hyperactivated. He just said out loud that he knew someone much crueler than him and that he should fear death, while his hand was raised, releasing a powerful aura. Chick stared at that with fear on his face. He was summoning the command of the soul, ordering Lord Light to rise, and the boss of that dungeon began to materialize right in front of everyone. Chick was terrified to see that being, and it was kneeling before the protagonist. The other members couldn't believe what they were seeing. Sarah asked if that was really Khan's power. He would be a summoner. No, he was a necromancer. And that extra there was also pissing herself in fear. Chick was also terrified upon seeing that entire figure in the protagonist's blade. Khan stated that this was the end of the line and that they would defeat him. Light began striking successive blows, to the point that it sent Chick's sword flying across the arena. The boy's rage was overflowing. He knew he wouldn't win against that being in front of him. Fear was taking over the boy. Light's giant axe was rising once again, and Chick knew that now he would meet his end. But the author cut the violent scene and showed Chick face down on the floor. While the others went to help the protagonist, asking what kind of power that was, he ended up explaining that it was something like a summoning, and Yamamoto had woken up and thanked our big guy for saving her. Ishii also thanked him as she began to cry. Khan also praised them for holding out so long against that boss. She had a blank look since Khan was carrying such a huge burden, and she wished to help him carry that burden one day in the future. She knew she hadn't done anything to protect her group, knew she needed to become much stronger to walk beside Khan. Right behind Lulu was watching that little girl lift Sheik. That way we go to the Shinjuo Association. Due to the recent events, the protagonist was promoted to rank D, and we said he didn't seem so happy about it, and in fact he wasn't so surprised, since reaching rank D really is a real obstacle. Many players stop at this rank because of the money they can earn, but the protagonist asked an unusual question if a rank D could complete a rank S mission, and she only said that was impossible. And that was exactly why he didn't want to stop now. He's going to become a rank S player, and we just laughed, wondering mentally if it was a joke, but maybe, just maybe, this boy could grow that much, and she smiled, saying she would be eagerly waiting for him to become a rank S in the future. Outside, the protagonist was approached. This man seemed to be a recruiter. In fact, he was the manager of a big guild, but he was soon approached by another recruiter, and then a third appeared, and the three started fighting, and a fourth appeared, and the four started fighting. It was funny to think that just a few weeks ago, he went through regression, and now there were so many people fighting to recruit him into their guilds. But without answering anyone, our big guy just ran away from there. And Lulu was playing with Gis while imagining that our protagonist would join a guild, and she was having fun doodling several little things there. Kan considered joining a guild, but while he was with Lulu, he could become even stronger. But that was when she said they would challenge her own dungeon, and the protagonist was trembling when he heard that. She asked if she had said something stupid, and he yelled if they weren't skipping too many steps. All the rank S players who challenged the tower had failed, but Lulu said that place was her home. They just had to leave it to her, and they would make it, but he was feeling something really bad about all of this. On Sakurako's side, Chick was telling her that Kan had used a trap to win, but that wasn't what she had received in the reports from the others, and the big boy was trembling when he heard that. That was when she grabbed his hair, saying that her own little sister wrote the report, so it was true. He tried to argue that Sayara was wrong, but Sakurako activated Two Tails and her aura was emanating intensely. While she transformed, she said she wasn't punishing him for failing to defeat Kan, but because he had just offended Sayara, no one in the world could insult her little sister, or else they'd go play for Vasco. Chick was trembling in fear, saying it was all wrong, but Sakurako was casting her abilities. Then she raised her hand toward Chick, and a kind of dome formed around him. The boy was feeling pain while trapped inside that barrier. Sakurako commanded the convergence skill, and that's when Chick was swallowed by that ability. Well, he went to play for the other team, right? What can you do? And Sakurako was quite impressed with this boy. While burning his photo, she decided she would personally make sure whether this boy was truly a real bet. We are taken to the explanation. When Lulu Heart's dungeon appeared in the world, specifically in the Shinjuo area, From it, mana was created across the world, along with many other dungeons. From then on, people began to be born with extraordinary powers, and the world called Lulu Heart's dungeon the Primordial. Our little duo was facing this primordial dungeon, and Lulu was asking if he didn't find that quite amazing. And indeed, the protagonist was admiring that structure. This is the only untouched dungeon in the world. They couldn't enter without permission, but it seemed the guard was fast asleep, and the two just took that moment to enter the dungeon. Then they arrived in front of the great portal. The protagonist was feeling a chill, but he had to go in, and the moment he entered, a being was watching him from afar, and inside it was different from what he expected. This was the untouched dungeon. It was beautiful. Lulu called it the Infinite Corridor. The first floor was a castle the size of an entire country. If you didn't follow the correct path, you'd get lost in this huge labyrinth. Normally, people were thrown into the forest before entering the castle, but she had made some arrangements. She had prepared several manuals for the protagonist. Yes, little books to challenge this dungeon. That's why she was drawing the day before making the labyrinth routes. Now it made perfect sense why she had spent so much time with those papers and gis. But the most incredible thing was that she remembered the routes of this labyrinth. Then she revealed that she had been alive for thousands of years, so that's why she remembered. And Kan asked what she was doing before the creation of her dungeons. Thus they began walking through the labyrinths. They were following the map perfectly, matching every direction she had marked. She revealed that she had given him the perfect path where there were no monsters, and with his current rank sea level, he wouldn't stand a chance against the enemies here. But he shouldn't be happy because there would be plenty of fighting ahead. He just got sad because he already imagined that, and Lulu led him through a path, and the two hid behind a column, and she said that his first opponent was there. Harbel had an extremely fragile body. Hearing that, the protagonist immediately charged toward that monster, but Lulu hadn't even explained that that little creature was extremely powerful. The moment the protagonist got close, Harbel's power began to flow through the room. She used the wave of exhaustion, and the protagonist's eyes widened because that power was consuming him. The exhaustion was taking over his entire body. He received the apathy status and no longer had the motivation to move. His whole body was completely locked against his will, and Harbel jumped toward Kan with her blades, and he had no reaction at all, only being dragged upward. Then it returned to an hour earlier and he yelled, asking why Lulu hadn't mentioned that that opponent was so powerful. And well, she tried, right? He's the one who ran ahead. She was strong, and Lulu explained that even with a fragile body, her mental strength was very high. So much so that she managed to apply level 7 apathy on Kan. That was equivalent to a 7th tier spell, and currently there wasn't a single human or monster who could resist that. Humans who could use up to the 3rd tier of magic were considered incredible. Those who were rank S could use the 6th tier, and Harbel could use up to the 10th tier of magic. In other words, she was even more powerful than a rank S player. But Lulu said that wasn't a problem. After all, the protagonist had the lost man. He just had to remove the negative effects, and he could win. I don't know if he was trusting his skill that much, but now was a great time for him to attack. Harbel would be the perfect opponent to gain even more experience. Thus we are taken to a church. Inside they told Sister Beatrice that they saw a novice player entering Lulu Heart's dungeon. He was challenging the most sacred dungeon in the world. This Beatrice started laughing. Beatrice was a rank S player, the 6th ranked in the world, and joked that this player would be a sacrifice for the dungeon. But if by some miracle he returned, they would offer him a great blessing. And the protagonist was extremely focused on his opponent. But then we go to the Dragon Guild. And that girl from earlier was super happy, telling her master about Kan's accomplishment. And he asked if such a man could really exist. He was excited to meet him. This is Senzak Kira, the leader of the Dragon Guild ranked S in the 15th position. He immediately imagined that this incident must have involved that crazy woman. Sakurako should now be after the protagonist, and when she started a hunt, she never stopped. That girl asked what they would do with Kan. He just closed his eyes and patted her head, saying to leave everything to him but to meet Kan and train him in the best way she knew. And the girl was scared because her master liked to beat others up during training. And they asked where that Kan guy was, and his assistant whispered where he would be. And he looked serious, asking if that boy had really entered Lulu Heart's dungeon. That way, we go back to the first floor of that dungeon. The protagonist kept fighting against Harbel, and those sharp claws of hers kept pressing our boy. Even though she had a fragile body, her blows frightened his sword. Even using the Lost Man to seal her mental powers, she was still a formidable opponent. Then he decided to summon his knights to fight. That way he could attack from both sides and she wouldn't be able to defend herself. Or at least that's what he thought, until Harbel crushed his armor all at once. And Kan managed to move to the flank of this monster and even smiled because he was going to make it. Then he used a side strike and actually hit the monster. The monster screamed in pain and also looked at the protagonist with furious eyes. He knew he hadn't won, so he summoned one more soul. Harbel's nature was to be curious, meaning this summoning would make her focus entirely on him. The two attacked the little monster again, and she was completely disoriented, not knowing whom to face. However, she decided to attack the protagonist directly with her blades, and he shouted that she was way too slow now. Then he delivered the new side strike that hit her, and by eliminating Harbel, he managed to devour her soul, and the entire mana power of this monster was entering his body. It was such an incredible power that Lulu even congratulated him. After all, he was absorbing the monster from the hardest dungeon in this world. Curious about Harbel's power, the protagonist decided to summon her, and her soul was much more intact than the others. It was clearer to see, and Kan was quite scared. That's because if you look closely, that little creature is actually really cute. And when he reached out his hand, Harbel shrank completely. And Lulu warned that this monster was a soul far too powerful for him to control at his current level. He would need to grow a lot to manage to control her. And he was frustrated because this wasn't explained before. And Lulu made it clear, after all, if the monster is strong, its soul will be too. That way they went to a spring, and the protagonist went to drink the water there, and his magic power was restored. He was feeling much better now. That's because when he summoned Harbel, he felt all his magic power being drained. Lulu explained that this spring existed because of the boss that lived on the first floor. She was someone who liked fair fights, but for some reason no human ever dared to use that spring. The protagonist just stared at all of it. And well, it's suspicious to have a spring with drinkable water right here, even if there's a little sign saying it could restore magic power. But anyway, he thanked her for the tip. Lulu still suggested there was a way for the boy to train. That way, we're taken to one of her armors, and another Harbel was around that armor, investigating out of curiosity. Kan called his Harbel and ordered her to use her fatigue power, and she channeled her aura using the wave of lethargy, and the poor little monster in the middle was struck by that power. That way, the protagonist and his armors rushed toward this monster and with a quick strike managed to eliminate it. And it seems he got another Harbel soul. He even played high five with his armor, and Lulu was outraged because that wasn't how she had planned to train him. After all, the protagonist had just used one of his summons as bait, but the most important thing is that this monster dropped a key. Then he asked what would this key be, and Lulu looked at it in surprise because it was really fast. And if there's a key, there's definitely a treasure chest. And Kan was extremely happy to hear that, and that now they should go hunt for that chest which would contain his world-class item. But over on the other side, Kan was running into Lulu Hart's dungeon to save the protagonist. That dungeon contained some of the craziest monsters in the world, and our protagonist was still admiring that key that shone so brightly. Minutes later, they arrived in front of a huge door, and Kan was feeling a kind of apprehension until the door began to open in front of the two. And inside it was a place adorned with countless treasure chests. Everything sparkled and seemed so powerful, but Lulu asked him to be careful because if he touched the wrong thing, he'd fall into a trap. It wasn't time to admire his treasure lair. They had only one objective in this place, so he faced the two chests that were in the middle of the hall, and Lulu started touching one chest and told Kan to do nothing because one of them was a very powerful mimic. The moment he touched the right chest, he received the last elixir, an S rank item, and he was completely terrified upon receiving that item. This item was something incomprehensible to humanity, but Lulu told him to stop being so eager because there were several other items he should see. Next he found a ring that was world-class, a pendant accessory that was also world-class, and that thing there that I have no idea what it is, but it's an S-rank item. Another ring, after all. This is a shonen. The protagonist needs to be a protagonist, right? And he now had hundreds of items in his hands. Lulu would love to visit her other secret vaults, but there wasn't much time. And the protagonist was actually feeling kind of bad for receiving so many items at once without doing anything. The Lord almost forgot. Even CA's turned to another wall filled with weapons. There was one more thing she needed to do right there, and Kan asked what it was while the little girl was already raising her hands. But she revealed that everyone would discover the surprise soon. That way we're taken to another place, and some kind of electric cat was running across the field. The protagonist was already quite tired and had a new summon that I have no idea where he got from. And that summon was laughing maniacally while using its water power. From above, Pikachu started electrifying everything while that water being created a large shield. Next, Rival was also summoned to fight and used her mental power to paralyze that cat. And the protagonist, without thinking twice, jumped with his sword toward that poor man's Pikachu and also managed to devour the soul of that monster. But it wasn't over yet, because a new fire being appeared and he knew about her, so he shouted for the others to fight. This fire monster opened its mouth and unleashed a huge blast of flames. The water summon managed to defend against that attack, and once again the protagonist and Harbel charged forward, and the little fire creature widened her eyes as both blades passed before her. Kan also obtained the fire soul and finally completed all the souls that Lulu had sent him, and he lost count of how many times he had been burned to a crisp in that place. But things were getting somewhat easier because of that item. That item allowed him to attack mana beings and elementals, and Lulu just joked that it was very convenient for him to have gotten that item before coming here. It was as if the protagonist could completely nullify the fire of that enemy. He did the same thing when he faced that water being, but he was completely worn out. Then his eyes widened because Lulu had said that he would fight the boss. He didn't stand a chance against any of the bosses in this place, but she just sighed deeply. Lulu simply frowned, saying that he would face a level L demon boss. She possessed an overwhelming power. She was a nightmare on Earth. And Kan needed real strength, not borrowed. She could still help him prepare to face this enemy, but she couldn't do more than that. In fact, she had already done much more than she should to help him. He needed to get stronger as soon as possible to save this world. The only one who could oppose the cruel and overwhelming fate of this world was Khan. So above all, he needed to fight for himself, face powerful adversaries, and come out victorious. And only then would he be able to defeat the demon lords. Khan had no words to argue now. He only apologized for all the complaints he had made, but she still believed that he could clear the first floor of her dungeon. Then they walked toward the boss's door. The protagonist was apprehensive, but with those words he felt much more encouraged. And Lulu patted his back, asking if he was really going to be the savior of this world. Then he should go all in there. And when he entered, a figure was levitating with a radiant and dazzling aura in the middle of the room, and the protagonist just commanded to observe her. That figure had her eyes closed, and she was gazing deeply into the soul of our protagonist. And he in a way was still uneasy. Then he pointed his sword, saying that no matter how many times it took, he would return to that room to defeat her. The boss formally introduced herself. Her name was Serendiana, the guardian of the first floor, and no one would pass through her and invade the great sanctuary of Lord Lulu Heart. And for the crime of entering her hall, his entire body would be pierced by light and then cast into darkness with her great radiant power, the moment she pointed her sword and used the light beam ability. And the protagonist just stared at it, unresponsive. And that power was coming at an incredible speed, and the round table simply announced that he had died. The protagonist fell with just one blow, and in an instant he couldn't understand what that light magic was. Lulu asked if her dear Khan would need help, but he just frowned, saying he wouldn't give up on this mission, even though that monster inside had absurd speed and incredible power that he couldn't even keep up with. And that's it, folks. At first I thought it was just a poorly drawn solo leveling, but I'll tell you, I got really curious to know how our protagonist will reach the rank of Demon Lord, and you guys tell me what you think he's going to do next. Don't forget to leave a like and a comment to help the video get recommended to more people. That's all for today. See you next time, everyone.